Let's bring in Sergeant Meghan Lehman over at the Troy Police Department, by far one of my favorite public information officers. Hi, Sergeant. How are you doing today?
Good morning. How are you?
We're great. We're great. It seems like you've been busy. You and your team, you have been busy there in the city of Troy lately. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the issues that we're seeing, especially what's up with all the guns, you know?
Sure. So we've gone from, early on in the pandemic, not much happening in terms of crime. We were keeping ourselves busy patrolling in neighborhoods, but crime was really down. Now we're at least back to normal, and we've been seeing some unusual incidents involving guns. Lots of incidents where we just pull someone over, maybe they're intoxicated and they have a gun on them, all the way up to we've had a couple shootings in Troy, which is extremely unusual for us.
With that, do you want to, what about the resources in order to be able to investigate these crimes to make sure they don't occur again?
Sure. So we are fortunate here that we have a fully staffed detective bureau, evidence technicians. It's important that we have them. A lot of times residents don't know the different capacities of the police department, the different specialties, but we need to have officers that know what they're doing when a shooting happens, or if a murder happens, or some other horrible crime. And we have that in Troy. Like I said, we're not dealing, fortunately, with these types of things every day, but when they do happen, we have people that know what they're doing. So it's important people know what they are and know what they're paying for with their taxes.
So one of the things, especially like in larger cities, when you have an incident involving guns and people shooting at one another, but maybe no one was hit and there was no property damage, I think sometimes people in the general public don't understand, if you can get those shell casings and start a NIBIN trace, it can actually help track down the person who was firing those shots, but it can also lead to solving other crimes.
Absolutely. So, there's instances where guns are recovered, years down the road. We might pull someone over, find a gun, and find that that gun was stolen a couple of years ago. And there are ways to connect those guns, with the rounds they've shot. So, yes, it's just pieces of evidence that can come together in a big way. In Troy, because we don't have a lot of violent incidents, when we do have them, we put a lot of resources on them. We don't give up just because there was no victim coming forward saying they were shot. It's a big deal that people were shooting in Troy. So we're going to, pursue that crime and find out who was involved and pursue charges.
We are coming into the holiday shopping season, of course. Somerset is one of the most popular malls for everyone to go to do their holiday shopping. Do you want to just talk in general about some of the safety tips people can do and the steps that they can take so that they don't become a victim? I know we talk about it every holiday season, but people still don't listen. They let their guard down.
Yes. So we have two malls in Troy, Oakland Mall and Somerset, lots of retail here. One of the things we see is, people leaving their cars unsecured. Like, for instance, we just had two dogs get stolen from a car in a retail area. So that's a little unusual, but it, could just as easily have been a purse or some packages that people left just sitting out. So if you do buy a bunch of packages, you're dropping them off at your car, make sure they're in the trunk or somewhere where people can't see them. Unfortunately, one of the other things we always deal with too is people just with their tempers running high. And I think that especially applies this year. So you get to a crowded shopping area and they are crowded. So, people fighting over parking spaces and that kind of thing. So, just be patient.
So what can you talk a little bit more about the dogs being stolen? I think I did see that on your Twitter page. Did they get them back? The owner got the dogs back?
Yes, that was amazing that we got those dogs back. Really amazing. And this is kind of showcases the importance of the partnership between the police and the media. The local media really helped get that out all over the metro area. So a woman had actually purchased these dogs at a gas station in another city, saw them on TV as stolen dogs and turned them into the Warren Police Department, who in turn brought them over here. And it was a fantastic, big, joyful reunion between the dog and their owners.
That is and, thank goodness for that person who came forward to say
Absolutely.
that, hey, I purchased them, and hopefully they were able to catch the people who actually stole them and then tried to resell them as well. I know that one of the big things, like the weather's nice right now, but going into the winter months, there are so many people and so many more accidents. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because I think some people don't realize that if they are in an accident, they can actually be ticketed for not obeying driving according to the hazardous conditions outside.
Yeah, so we would hear that a lot where people say, well, I was driving under the speed limit. If the roads are icy, snowy, you're driving too fast for conditions. And that's what the ticket is, typically driving too fast for conditions. So you may have to drive, we've seen it on the freeway where people will end up in the ditch. We'll have multiple cars off on the side of the road. They might have been driving 30 miles an hour, but they are still responsible for the safety of their vehicle. So yeah, we encourage people to stay off the roads if they don't need to be on the roads during a winter weather emergency. Beyond just the fact you don't want to get in a crash, resources are going to be limited. We're going to be dealing with more crashes, whether it's police, EMS, fire, whatever it might be.
So, do you think that maybe because so many people are staying home more now because of COVID, that number could go down this year?
Yes, I think so. We see a lot, a dip in crashes across the board. But unfortunately, we're still seeing people out here driving drunk and under the influence of drugs. And that continues to be an issue during the snow and icy season. So a lot of times those individuals driving under the influence are actually going to be easier for us to catch because they will lose control of their vehicle. So it can be a very dangerous situation.
Hey, so with that, are you seeing the number of drunk driving cases go down right now, or during the shutdown period or these pause periods where the restaurants and the bars are closed to indoor dining? Has that impacted some of those drunk driving cases at all for you and your team members?
I believe they're down a little bit, not that much though, not maybe what you would think. I did have the numbers, but it maybe was a 20% dip last month if I had to guess. So in the beginning, crime was way down across the board, including drunk driving. Now, people are, in some cases starting to lose it a little bit in some ways, and we're seeing a little bit more of driving under the influence of alcohol and drugs than we did in the beginning.
What about domestic violence cases?
So the last I checked, those numbers were relatively similar, but with mental health issues is something we're seeing a little bit more of, and it's just a vein that runs through a lot of the things we're seeing. It might be a traffic stop. We talk to someone and find out there is some other issue going on here. So there's definitely some things in play between mental health, substance abuse, and family troubles, domestic violence.
So it seems as right now we're not hearing a lot about the defund the police movement that we saw a few months ago. It seems to have quieted down. But one thing that came out of that, there was a lot more discussion about police officers trying to, be social workers too when you're in the middle of a scene and trying to get more training for your officers, especially in that area of mental health. What's it like in the Troy Police Department right now? Are you continuing that conversation? Is there any training that's being scheduled to address these issues?
So we've already had a lot of training. In some ways, Troy was ahead of this because we've been running pretty efficiently for years where we don't send officers on calls that they don't need a police officer on. For instance, EMS calls that don't require a police officer where there is no apparent safety issue. And we also work closely with social service agencies. So Haven, the domestic violence agency for Oakland County, we will work closely with Child Protective Services. So we've been involving those professionals for a long time. And we've been trained in many issues. So there's a training called mental health first aid, which is pretty common for officers in Oakland County to go to. Many of our officers have been to that. So it just gives you kind of the skills when you are dealing with someone to do that mental health first aid and de-escalate. And we do have de-escalation training as well in Troy. All of our officers are trained in it. It is a thread in all of our defensive tactics training.
Sergeant Meghan Lehman with us here on the Oakland County MegaCast. She's with the Troy Police Department. I know the last time we spoke to you, you had started an initiative through your social media with the code case from 1978. Tell us a little bit where that is. Did you get any tips or any leads out of that?
We have gotten some tips. In fact, we've gotten some that have filtered in last week. So we're following up on them. It's still, it's an open investigation. There's lots of different things. We're looking at things from 40 years ago up until this new information. So there's a lot to work through. So we're doing that, and we're very hopeful that we'll, get some resolution.
I can only imagine for the family what that must mean. I should back up just a little bit for those that are not familiar with the cold case, the Webster death. Do you want to give us a little bit of background on it?
Sure. So in October of 1978, Gail Webster was a resident of Troy, apartment complex, Coolidge and Big Beaver area, the Somerset apartments. She was, bludgeoned to death, and her killer was never found. So there's a lot of weird turns in this case, but essentially no suspect was ever identified and no answers. The family never got answers. This was just an effort to put some new light in the case, and hopefully we can solve it. That is always the goal here. We're also looking at the DNA aspect of it. Is there something we can do that hasn't already been done? So we're hoping one way or another we can get answers for the family.
I know that by putting it out on social media, you were hoping for some of these new leads, but did it also bring in information that wasn't, really relevant that you had to chase down?
I wouldn't say anything that wasn't relevant, but we did get some, tips from psychics and, people with just kind of more far-fetched kind of information that, we were hoping someone would come forward and say, hey, somebody told me they did this crime, but it doesn't always work out that way. We work with the information we have. So we have some more promising type of tips that we got recently. I think one of the challenges with this was the week and the day we went for was a really big news day, especially around here. So we were kind of fighting that. It was the day that the governor kidnapping plot came forward. So that was unfortunate, but there was a couple unfortunate in the timing and the criminal incident there. But we're hoping we can, if we don't get a good tip this time that leads to something, we don't solve it through DNA, we will keep going at this again. If we do it again next year, we will. We don't want to let this case sit in a file for another 40 years.
Yeah, so a lot of people that maybe don't understand what goes into the behind the scenes, you plan this press conference, you get the information ready, you have the family involved as well. And then if there is another big news story, you get bumped. And when that happens, then you don't get the attention that you were hoping to get, which in this case could have been national news, because there's, always a chance that they've left the area long ago.
Yes, for sure. We did get some national news coverage, which I think some of the tips, I would say at least half of the tips came from that. So there was a couple of newspapers that picked it up. So that's great. But, like you said, we will try again, and you just never know what's going to happen. So we'll keep trying. We'll keep trying to bring attention to it in whatever ways we can.
So with that, it seems to be over the past few years, these groups that hunt, they kind of come online, and their chat groups and other groups that try to come together to solve these crimes. Netflix did a documentary on one about, was it the cats and this, that, and the other? I forget, it's been a couple years since I watched it. But by strangers coming together and utilizing social media and online information, sometimes they can be an attribute to police departments to help solve these. Have you had any of these types of groups reach out to you?
We have not. We would welcome it. We would use any type. We're open to different types of tactics on this. We worked with a podcast, the Already Gone podcast. Nina Instead runs that. And she put that information out there on a couple of platforms like Reddit. So we greatly appreciate her. She did a great job covering it, but we look to do more podcasts as well. We're open and interested in doing new and different things with this.
Members of your social media team and the public information office over there at the Troy Police Department, you've definitely been a leader for so many law enforcement agencies across the company, but also great to have you in taking that interest in social media and trying to reach members of the community. Sergeant, we want to thank you for your time. We wish you and your team a happy holiday season.
Same to you. Thanks so much for having me.